For more perspective now on the Derek Chauvin trial, the death of George Floyd, and the fallout, the racial reckoning that's come as a result, let's bring in Yale Professor Elizabeth Hinton. Her new book, America on Fire, The Untold History of Police Violence and Black Rebellion Since the 1960s, comes out next month. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. First question. The protests after George Floyd's killing were on a massive global scale. Was this the start of a new movement, you think, or the renewal of an old one?
Well, certainly protests against police brutality have been happening throughout the 20th century. But what we noticed in 2020 was particularly unprecedented. The global reach of this case and the scale of the protests. Tens of thousands of Americans, millions of Americans taking to the streets. This is what some historians are calling the largest social movement in American history.
You take issue with the word riots. From your perspective, your research, what's a better descriptive word and why?
Well, police violence is the most tangible expression of systemic racism. And when people protest against police violence, police killings, police brutality, they're not just protesting that incident. They're protesting unemployment, they're protesting lack of decent housing opportunities, they're protesting discrimination in education. And these are demands that are rooted in civil rights grievances. And instead of understanding the kind of socioeconomic forces that lead to protests, whether they be nonviolent or violent, authorities have tended to label this kind of political violence as a riot, and in doing so, deem these actions criminal rather than seriously reckoning with the forces of systemic racism that brought people to the streets in the first place.
Sure. As we both know, it was Dr. King who said, describe it as the language of the unheard.
Exactly.
To that point, how has law enforcement changed since the 60s and 70s? If not, why not?
Well, the practices of stop and frisk, the kinds of police violence that, we now can capture on our cell phone cameras. Everybody has a cell phone in their pocket today. Right. That is new. But the kind of violence we're seeing, the aggressive enforcement of misdemeanors, these campaigns have been hallmarks of American policing for the last 50 years or so.
So do you believe Floyd's death will lead to permanent change? Early on, it seemed, for instance, that white America and black America were united in outrage. But there's evidence the divide is widening again.
We can hope so, but we've been here before. And until we do see a kind of fundamental systemic change to policing culture in general, these types of deaths are sure to continue. It's time for us to think about a different set of investments into vulnerable communities, into communities that have been over-policed and underprotected for decades at this point, and new approaches to public safety. And until that kind of fundamental transformation happens, we're going to continue to see these types of incidents of police violence and protests and outrage in response.
With your research, have you seen any example across the country where you can point to and say, yeah, they're on the right path? Some of what they're doing is heading in the right direction.
Well, I do think in recent years, and particularly in the aftermath of Michael Brown's killing in Ferguson in 2014 and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, we've begun to see some police reforms that are scaling back the kind of zero tolerance policing that characterized much of what we saw in the 80s and 90s. And that is the aggressive enforcement of misdemeanors, that is stop and frisk practices, and that is hostility and tensions between police and the communities that they're intended to serve. And so in recent years, we've seen some reforms to try to improve police-community relations. And in fact, Minneapolis was one of the cities of a national program called the National Network for Safe Communities out of the Department of Justice that was started in the aftermath of Michael Brown's killing in Ferguson. And yet, because of the lack of real fundamental cultural change within the Minneapolis police department, Black men in particular are still being killed at the hands of police.
Final question. Obviously, we don't know the outcome of the Derek Chauvin trial. It hasn't gone to the jury yet. The defense hasn't even presented their case yet. But what message do you think the verdict will send, whether it's a conviction, an acquittal, or something in between?
Well, it's clear that we're at a crossroads and that we've been at a crossroads. And when this video went public, it ignited a lot of anger and frustration, and also backlash on both sides to the ensuing protests. And so I think, whether or not Derek Chauvin is convicted or acquitted, we're going to see a type of backlash on either side. But we should hope that justice in this case will be served.
Professor Elizabeth Hinton, thank you so very much.
Thank you for having me.
You can pre-order her new book out next month, America on Fire.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.